It is currently June 2018, the 10th to be exact. This is another P2PVPS project update. So, let's dive into what's been accomplished this month. First of all, the GitHub repositories have been reorganized. Did I misspell that? I did. So let me show you what that looks like. So github.com/P2PVPS. A lot of the repositories in here, the original like version 1.0 repositories, have been removed. And let me show you where, I'll show you where they live in a minute. So at the top of the repos, I have these three main repositories. The client is what runs on a computer or on a Raspberry Pi and allows you to rent out the device for cryptocurrency. The server is the actual server software that runs and creates this sort of market or network. And then the server deployment is how you easily deploy the servers, and it uses this repo. So this is what you actually, this server deployment repo is what you actually clone on a server in order to produce a P2PVPS server. And I'm debating on whether or not to tack in another one, which is this dashboard. So I'll show you this in a minute. The dashboard is essentially, if you run a P2PVPS server, there's two sides to it. There's the back end and there's the front end. And this repository is the back end, and this dashboard repository is the front end. So I may pin that up here as well, so you have the four, but really this is the software you want to run. But anyways, they've all been updated with readmes and installation instructions. Let's go through here. So the server deployment, the client software basically stands on its own. The server deployment is what you deploy to create a P2PVPS server, and it pulls a lot of these other repos, like this one, the server repo, but also the listing manager. It relies on this OpenBazaar node library. It pulls the docs if you want to install the docs. So some of these repos all come together to create a server, and the server deployment contains the Docker, the image or whatever, the recipe for pulling them all together and easily creating a server. But anyways, these have been organized. The point is to like remove some of the noise. So a lot of the deprecated code doesn't need to be there to confuse new people. It still exists. Let me show you where it exists. I go to my profile. I created this P2PVPS deprecated group. And so I moved all the code, I forked all the code over here. So the original server, the original dashboard, the original server deployment, and then there's this library that I forked called node sudo that lets you run sudo privileged commands in node. So this is where all the old code lives. So when code retires and it gets to the point where in the future where like what's happened where we went a completely redesign on the server, the old code will be deprecated to this repository. So that's that. The more exciting news is Dashboard 1.0 has been released. So that would be this repository, P2PVPS Dashboard 2, and while that's coming up, let me show you what it looks like. So you can access it by going to p2pvps.net, and you'll be immediately presented with a login screen. And the thing is, you can put anything you want here, and then click this create account to create an account. It doesn't verify anything. I'm trying to make the system as straightforward, low friction, and anonymous as possible. And the first thing you're going to get presented with is the rental listings. These are all the devices on the market that are ready for rent right now. I'm in the process of lowering this default value from 30 cents, and it should be per day, to 10 cents per day. And then, of course, the price doesn't really matter right now because you can use the coupon code testing to lower the price to 1 cent per day. and those instructions are on the OpenBazaar store page for that coupon code and instructions on how to do that. And but anyways, this is what you see. I basically cleaned up the user interface, so there's just a lot less noise. This will eventually lead to the minimum amount of profile updates that a person does. It should be mobile friendly, but I haven't had the time to really do much testing on a cell phone. And then of course, then you go to your own devices tab, and these are the listings for all the devices I have up on the network. You can see they're connected. And then there's a lot of the stuff's kind of fake data right now, but that will eventually be populated with real data like device specs, earned money. But basically just cleaned all this up, and then the rented devices view is not yet working, soon to come. But here's the repo, and here's instructions on how to set up the front end and the releases. You can see I released version 1.0, so that's really what I did or wanted to announce. And again, you can go to P2PVPS.net to play with it. There's also the documentation all the documentation has been updated. So if you go to P2PVPS.org/documentation, or you just go to .org and you go to the resources menu, you can click on documentation. There's two types of documentation. There's the specifications, which talk about the client, the server deployment, all the sub pieces of software and how they all work together and how they all communicate together. And then there's the API documentation, and so this is the actual P2PVPS server API, and it uses this standardized documentation that APIs are typically documented in. Includes curl instructions so that you can test the individual API calls right on the command line without having to get crazy and write a sophisticated program. And this lists, so this has all been updated, and it lists all the various API endpoints and how to access them and what sort of permissions you need. I really like, so let's go to the user. And so you'll see things like post, and so this is how you create a new user, and you don't need to have any permissions in order to do that. You don't need to, there's admin, there's user, and there's none. So anybody can create a user. That's essentially what this is saying. Here's the information you need to include in order to create one successfully. Here's a curl command that you can run from the command line to test it. These are all great tools if you want to create your own server to test and make sure everything is running correctly. And then delete, and let's see, a user, so you need to be a logged in user in order to use this API, otherwise it'll give you a 401 unauthorized error. So there's stuff like that, and then there's other things. There's a few, like the device private, that requires admin permissions. So there's really only one admin in the system, and which is used by services like the listing manager to manage things. So these are APIs, so they're documented, they exist. Normal users can't use them, but they're important if you're running a VPS server to understand how some of the lower level software is making everything happen. So anyways, this documentation's here. This has all been updated. All this documentation has been updated. I'm very happy about this because I've kind of been in stealth mode. I haven't put a lot of effort into recruiting people from the wider open source community because I felt like I had to have really solid documentation, and now I'm there. And I also feel like I need to have like a minimum viable product, like something that people can immediately log into and play with, and that is P2PVPS.net, the app here. So getting very close. I'm going to start putting more effort into like advertising and just soliciting the open source community and trying to make people more aware of this project now that there's the documentation for people to refer to. So that's pretty much what I focused on this last month. Let me give a quick shout out to someone who created a GitHub issue. I'm not going to try to pronounce this, but this guy here found a problem with the dashboard. He tried to hit this delete button, and it didn't work, and he filed an issue. So thank you for that, because that's awesome. I knew about it, hadn't gotten to it, and that problem escaped the version 1 release, and it was filed in a wrong place, but that's fine. I just created a new issue in the right place and linked to it, and just really appreciate community feedback at this point. I love every bit of it that I can get. And so renewals is now the big focus. I know I mentioned this last month that it was the focus, and it still is the focus. There's a lot of moving pieces, especially with the new server, than there was before, and it was pretty buggy before, so I'm trying to build a version that's not buggy. And but that's currently in active development. This is the #1 thing being focused on right now. And again, if you want to view the other roadmap objectives, you can go to the roadmap page. This actually needs to be moved down because this is the rental listing right here that's been completed. And renewals is next up. And then these are the future milestones that I plan to achieve, hopefully this summer. And of course, would love some help if you're interested in trying out the software, or you just have questions. Contact us. Best way is on the Slack channel. You can also tweet at us, or send a message on Facebook, or just go down here to the bottom. Oop, of not that page. But you can go to the Contact Us page. Alright, this has been another update for the P2PVPS project.